All right, please take out a piece of paper, and this is the review for financial literacy, chapters 5 through 7. That would be 5, 6, and 7. Just so you know, we have a total of 50 questions on the test. What you'll want to do is you'll want to focus for the next 40-45 minutes on this review, and I guarantee you will do better than if you just kind of zone out. You'll want to take this review. You'll want to spend some time in the 3 chapters reviewing mostly the terminology. And then if you really want to and feel like it will benefit you, you can go on the website and listen to the other review I have on there of the same material. And the combination of this review and that review would really prepare you properly for the test on Monday, okay? All right. Are you ready? I'm going to switch my audio files, my audio reviews, to video reviews. I think watching the video on the internet will enhance the experience. Because then you can listen and stare at me at the same time. It doesn't get better than that. Okay. What?
You edit these?
I edit the beginning and the ending, and I put a little music to it and everything. It's incredible. It's kind of like Avatar or something, really. All right. I already know I'm not going to be using this version of it, so you've already messed it up so bad. Anyway.
You should send us to the UVU people.
Sure. Name the 3 credit unions that keep track, or credit bureaus, I'm sorry, credit bureaus, not credit unions. The 3 credit bureaus in the United States that keep track of your credit scores.
Ginnie Mae.
No. Those are different. Those are other organizations that they don't do anything with credit. Anybody? They are. Are you ready for this? TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian. Those are the 3 credit bureaus in the United States, and they all give you a credit score when you pull a credit report. Okay? TransUnion, Equifax, 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 and Experian. Tell me the tax advantages. What are the tax advantages to owning a house?
Mortgages.
What's that mean?
You can take out a mortgage.
How does that advantage? What advantage is that?
You can pay for stuff by taking on more of the mortgages you pay.
You're in the ballpark, but no. Go ahead.
When you own a house, you can get a deduction on your taxes for owning that house and owning the property.
Okay, you're right. What is the deduction about? Anybody know?
An itemized deduction, isn't it?
It is an itemized deduction. Next week we will be doing tax returns. You'll learn more about that. But it is the interest of the mortgage that you can write off. So if you make a $1,000 a month payment on a mortgage, and let's say of that $1,000, that's $12,000 a year. Let's say that $950 a month is interest. That's a little over $10,000 a year. You can write that $10,000 off your taxes. It's a big tax deduction. It's a way the government encourages people to buy property. They want citizens to be married, and they want citizens to own property. You become a better United States citizen if you own property and are married. And so they give you tax benefits for both of those, interestingly. And for having children. That's exactly right. Good. All right, so what are the tax benefits?
Doesn't the house also appreciate in value?
Yes, but that's not a tax issue, but you're right. That is another big benefit of owning a home, is the appreciation that the home enjoys if it goes up in value. Okay. What is the tax advantages of renting? Well, yeah, I guess that's sort of a tax. You can write off your property tax too, but it's not really an advantage because you have to pay it, and then you get to write it off. So when you rent, you don't have to pay property tax, but there are no tax advantages to renting. There aren't any. If you pay $800 a month in rent, that's $10,000 a year. That's just an expense that you can't write that off anywhere. So you will hear people say, I need to buy a house, I need the tax write-off, or the tax benefit. So anyway, what's inflation?
Is when one
$100 today is worth less than $100 10 years from now?
Well, we have to be careful how we say that. $100 today is worth $100 10 years from now too. If you put a $100 bill away,
Lose its value.
it's the buying power, the purchasing power of the dollar goes down. That's inflation. The $100 will buy less groceries 10 years from now than they will today. That's for sure. Okay? The $100 is still worth $100 though. So it's the purchasing power, a declining purchasing power is inflation. Let's see, tell me about the difference between a debit card and a credit card.
Debit cards, you don't get infinite money.
What?
Like, you don't get to spend more than you own. Like in credit cards, you can spend more, but you have to pay them back.
Sort of right. You're in the right ballpark. Yeah.
You use
Debit
credit for
cards
credit.
deducts the amount directly from your checking account, and credit cards is technically money that you are borrowing.
Perfect. That's the best way to say it. That's the clearest way to say it. You were in the ballpark, Demetrius. You were. All right. So when you use a debit card, they through the modern miracle of technology, they immediately take money directly out of your account. You're not borrowing any money when you use a debit card. You are accessing your own account. It's just exactly like writing a check, basically. When you use a credit card, on the other hand, you are borrowing money from Visa or MasterCard. They will pay the bill, and then you owe them the money. Big difference, actually. Even though it feels like it's the same transaction, it's not. It's different. Do you get any credit? Does your credit score go up by using a debit card? The answer is no, because you're not using any credit. When you use your credit card, though, you are building credit. Okay? Let's see. What's another name for money in your checking account? This is I think chapter 5 on banking. The money that sits in your checking account is called a demand deposit. A demand deposit. It's money that you deposited that you can demand anytime you want it. It's the least, truthfully, it's the least valuable money to a bank. I mean, it's good. They want it. They want the money. But they can't use it as effectively as they can use money in a savings account or certainly in a certificate of deposit. Because they know the money in your checking account is being used up all the time. So that, yeah, they can't loan it out as effectively. Anyway, so that's why they generally don't pay a lot of interest on checking accounts. They'll pay more interest on savings accounts, and they'll pay more interest on certificates of deposit. What?
So that was demand deposit?
A demand deposit. That's the money in your checking account. Tell me about the 3 types of endorsements we talked about.
Fannie Mae.
Boy, you guys love that. You love Fannie Mae, but no, that's not.
There's 3 of those.
Yeah, Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, and Ginnie Mae. You're right. Okay. No, has nothing to do with endorsements whatsoever. There are 3 types of endorsements too. Number 1 is the blank endorsement. That's where you just sign the back of the check. It's a blank endorsement. The second one is a restrictive endorsement. This is where you normally, the most common restrictive endorsement is for deposit only.
Which one was that called? Sorry.
Restrictive. And businesses, when they take checks, they will stamp the back of them for deposit only. And then you can only deposit it.
Restrictive is what? Deposit only?
For deposit only is a type of restrictive endorsement. It's where you're restricted to how you no longer can cash that check. The last type of endorsement would be a special endorsement. Some books call it qualified. I think our book calls it special. Special endorsement is where you change the terms of the check somehow. Where I owe you $20, you owe somebody else $20. I write you a check for $20. You turn around, sign the back, pay to the order of Billy Bob, and all of a sudden they can cash the check. That you're changing the terms of the check by what you're using a special endorsement. Okay. All right. What's a security deposit? A security deposit is used when you rent a property. You pay a security deposit to provide the landlord with some safety in case you leave the apartment owing rent or you do damage on the property. They will take the damage out of the security deposit. Okay? Generally speaking, it all depends, but generally speaking, it's pretty common for them to take 1 month's rent as a security deposit. That's not uncommon. So if you do really a lot of damage, that the security deposit won't cover it. Then they turn around and can sue you later if they need to, if they can find you, but which is hard. All right. Any questions about security deposits? Yeah.
What if you never do any damage and you pay your rent on time?
Then officially, legally, that security deposit is refundable to you. Yeah, after you move out, they have 2 weeks or 3 weeks to get it to you after they've inspected the property. Let's see, let's talk about different kinds of credit. There are two major kinds of credit, open-ended and closed-ended. Give me an example of each. What's the most commonly used open-ended credit? Credit cards. Credit cards. They never close. There's no maturity date to a credit card. I've had one credit card for over 30 years. And it just keeps renewing. That's because there's never an end to it. A closed-ended loan is one that has a maturity date. Car loans, mortgages, most loans are closed-ended. This is where you're going to make 48 payments, and at the end of the 48 payments, you're going to have paid off the loan. Or you're going to have a balloon payment at the end. But it's on the 23rd of September 2015, that loan comes due and it's going to be finished. That's a closed-ended loan. Most of the loans are closed-ended. Okay? I feel the same way. Okay. How do you define equity? What is equity?
Like equity in a home.
Yes.
That's when you have, it's like the gained value over time.
Well, equity is defined as the value of the property minus the debt. Minus the debt. So if you have a house that's worth $200,000 and you owe $80,000 on the house, your equity is $120,000. That's how much of the house value you actually own.
So it's like what I said, because
Yes.
when it gains value, then the debt's.
That's true. But there's also equity, whatever down payment you put in the house is also your equity. Sure. So, and in fact, every month when you make a payment, remember, every time you make a mortgage payment, on the vast majority of mortgages, you are paying down a little bit of the principal amount, paying down a little bit of the loan. So every month you have more equity in your house. Unless the house is going down in value, which we've been experiencing over the last 3 years. That's kind of ugly. Anyway. But yeah, every month your parents, when they make a mortgage payment, they have more equity in their house than they did the month before. By a little bit. Okay. Let's see. You put money in a savings account and you earn interest. What is the definition of interest? Interest is the rental charge that is paid for using other people's money. That's what interest is. Is it better to receive interest or pay interest? Receive it, yeah. That's because you're putting your wealth to work. That's what wealthy people do. They lend out their money in one way or the other, and they earn a rental charge on it because they're lending their money out. Well, banks borrow your money. You are lending them your money, and they pay you an interest. Is that interest taxable or not taxable? It is taxable. When you earn, most forms of interest is taxable. If you put money in the bank and you earn $10,000 in interest, you have to write that on your tax return as additional income and pay taxes. There are certain kinds of interest, like municipal bonds, if you'll remember, back in those days when we talked about that. Municipal bonds are tax exempt, which is one of the advantages of a municipal bond. Okay? But most interest that you earn will be taxable as ordinary income. What's a stop payment order?
Where you tell
Go.
Like if you get your checkbook stolen,
Okay?
you can tell the bank to cancel, like,
That's a good point,
stop
yeah.
them from
Using the
keeping
check.
money from.
Right. And good point. So when the check comes in, you can cancel any check you've written. Now, you have to be careful. You can't buy something and then cancel payment on the check. That's called fraud, and you can go to jail for that. But there are circumstances, like a checkbook being stolen or something, where you can stop payment on those numbers and the bank will not cash those. They will not process those checks. There's a fee, a stop payment fee, but that's what a stop payment is. Good. Tell me about bankruptcy. What are the two different chapters of bankruptcy that people can be involved in? Yes, Chapter 13 and Chapter 7. Chapter 13 is called reorganization. This is where you go to a judge at a bankruptcy court in Salt Lake, and you say, I'm a mess. My finances are, I owe a lot of money to people, but I do make money, and I can pay them if I get enough time to make payments. And the judge will stop the collections. They will shut down the foreclosure. They will stop the various things, and then they will take your money every month. You send them the judge $600 or whatever, and the judge will start paying everybody. And then in 3 years or 4 years later, you emerge from Chapter 13 and have paid off all your debts. That's reorganization. Now, if you're really a mess, and the judge looks at your situation and says, this is impossible, you cannot, they will change it. In fact, they can change a 13 to a 7. Chapter 7 is called liquidation. If you're in really bad shape, you will liquidate. And they will take all your assets, they will take even some of your furniture, and they'll take all sorts of different, they'll make you sell your house if you owe too much on your house. They can even take your car sometimes, depending on how much equity you have in your car. And they will take all that, sell it off, and take the money and pay off all your creditors as much as they can. And maybe if you owe me $1,000, I might give $200 back. But then the debt is erased, and you don't owe me the other $800 just through bankruptcy. That's called liquidation. Any bankruptcy is a last resort. You never really want to file bankruptcy unless you absolutely find no other way to get out of your problems. It destroys your credit for 10 years, 7 to 10 years, and it just is not a good thing at all. It's not pleasant. You probably know somebody who has filed bankruptcy. Maybe you do. Anyway, any questions about that? Okay, let's see. Do banks, are banks, I guess, required to pay a certain minimum interest to you? The answer is no, they're not. There is no, they could, a bank could come out and say, hey, we'll let you deposit your money here, but we're not paying any interest. I mean, today they're almost paying no interest, but if a bank said that, then that would be a problem because nobody would use that bank, but they don't have to, they're not legally required to pay you a minimum set of interest. Okay? There's no such thing. What's a prepaid phone card? What kind of, is that a debit card or a credit card? A prepaid phone card. It's actually neither. It's a trick question, I guess. I'm sorry to do that to you.
Prepaid what card?
Well, any kind of prepaid card. It's neither a debit card or a phone or a credit card. It's a
Gift card?
a gift card is a prepaid card. And that's not debit or credit. It's a third type of card. If I gave you a $50 Amazon gift card, it doesn't access your account and you're not borrowing any money. So it's a totally separate type of deal.
I thought you were talking about like the prepaid decent gift card.
Well, that would be the same thing. If they're prepaid, then it's not a debit or a credit card. It's a prepaid card, which is a separate category of cards. Okay? Let's see. Well, we've already talked about that. Ooh, here's a good question. You're buying a house. First of all, when you decide to buy a house, what kind of company do you go to help you buy your house? What's it called? No. Well, a mortgage company, you go to a mortgage company to obtain a loan on the house, that's true. But the company you go to help with all the paperwork of all the buying and the selling. They help you get all the sellers to sign, they get the buyers to sign, they take the money and they disperse the money properly. What's that company called? There are a bunch of them around. We've talked about this. They're called title companies. Title companies facilitate the closing of real estate transactions. It's called the closing. This is where the seller comes in, signs all the documents. The buyer comes in, signs all the documents. And then the title company issues the checks to everybody that they need to issue checks to. They are what we call a neutral third party. You don't need to know that, but anyway, so here's the deal. I'm buying your house. Let's just say. I go out and get a mortgage to buy the house. Where does that money go? do I get that money? Do they hand it, do they give me the mortgage amount, or where does it go? Truthfully, I never see the money. I don't ever see it. It goes to the title company. It goes to the title company, and the title company basically gives it to the seller. It's the seller's money, because they're selling the house. Now, generally speaking, the seller also has a mortgage. And so what happens is the title company pays off the mortgage, pays all the expenses for closing, and then they issue whatever's left. Whatever the money is that is left, they give that to the owner. That make sense? So if I had to ask you on a test, like this test on Monday, if I asked you who gets the money from getting a new mortgage, you would have to say it's the seller who gets the money. Now the seller may not see it either, because if they have a mortgage, you know, they're going to pay it off. But that's the seller gets the money from the mortgage. Okay. Let's see. You have a credit card. You're making payments. Let's say you pay $30 a year to have the card. When you add up all the expenses associated with your credit card, all the interest you've paid and the fees you've paid and the other things, what do we call that? That money that you paid. We don't call it interest. We call it the finance charge. The finance charge includes the interest and other expenses associated with the card. Okay? Finance charge. If you had $20,000 that you didn't need to touch for the next 3 years, what would you do with it? What would be the most appropriate investment vehicle?
Bond.
Let's talk about in a bank. Or would you put it in a checking account, a savings account, or what other kind of account? A CD, a certificate of deposit, would be a better choice. Why? They pay higher interest. Why do they pay higher interest on a CD? Perfect answer. You are giving up liquidity. And when you give up liquidity, you demand a higher rate of return, which makes sense. And the bank is happy to pay it, because now the bank has your money for 3 years. And they can use that money a lot more effectively than they can use your demand deposit. That you can come in tomorrow and write a check and take it all out. Okay? So, certificate of deposit. Okay. Credit cards. Remember that whenever you use a credit card, you are borrowing money. Right? You are going into debt every time you swipe a credit card. And when I say swipe it, I don't mean steal it. I mean, okay. Let's see if there's anything else here. Okay. You're going to buy a house. I'm buying Dallin's house. I go out to get a mortgage for a certain amount of the, let's say 80% of the purchase price. I'm going to put down 20%. That's the down payment. I'm going to borrow 80%. Why do I want to borrow no more than 80%? Do you remember why? Because if you borrow more than 80%, you generally have to pay private mortgage insurance, PMI, which is fairly expensive. PMI is an insurance policy that you buy that in case you don't make the payments, the mortgage company gets paid from the insurance. If you put down 20% or more, you don't have to buy the PMI. And the PMI can be $60, $70, $80 a month. It can be pretty expensive.
That's personal mortgage and.
Insurance, personal, no, it's called private mortgage insurance, not personal. Private mortgage insurance. All right, so I'm buying the mortgage. I'm obtaining this new mortgage to buy the house. There are 2 ways mortgage companies make money. What are they?
PMI.
Nope, they don't get the PMI. How do mortgage companies make money?
Interest.
Interest on the mortgage, of course. They're going to charge 4.5%, 4%, 5% today, somewhere in the low 4s right now, which is remarkably low. So that's one way they make money. What's the other way they make money?
Foreclosure.
Nope.
They lose
Well,
money on
maybe, but
foreclosures.
what?
Don't they lose money on foreclosures?
A lot of times they do. They are not, believe me, mortgage companies do not like having to foreclose. They would much rather have you make your payments on time. That's what they're in the business for. They're not trying to steal your house from you. They're not. That's a big problem for them. They don't like it at all. So the way they make money generally, and the more important way than the interest, because most mortgage companies don't hold on to the mortgage. They sell off the mortgage within a few months. They like fees. They have fees that they charge when you obtain a mortgage. It's expensive to get a mortgage. The most common fee is called what? We've talked about this. Called points. Remember points? How much is a point?
I don't remember talking about that.
You don't remember? Yeah, sure. It's in Chapter 7 under home ownership. It's called points. 1 point equals 1% of the loan. And you pay points up front at the beginning, at the closing you will pay it. So if I called a mortgage company today and I said, hey, I want a 30-year fixed rate mortgage on my house. I'm going to be putting down 25%, so I'm looking for a 75% LTV, loan to value, loan. Fixed rate, 30-year. The guy would say, that loan right there today will cost you 4.25% interest and 1.5 points. And I know if I'm borrowing $200,000, I know that 1.5 points equals $3,000, which I'm going to have to come up with at the closing. Does that make sense? Points. Now, there is something interesting that can happen. And that's what this question is about. You can, if you want to reduce your interest rate, you can pay more points. See, what the mortgage company is looking at is how much am I making on the interest, how much am I making on points. If you want to pay more points, they will reduce the interest rate. You can do what we call buying down the loan. Buy down the loan means we are paying more interest up front, or pay more points up front, and the interest rate being charged would be lower. Now, when would that be a good idea?
When you have money?
It would be under two circumstances. If you have some cash right now, and you are going to live in the house for a long time, buying down the loan might actually work out very nicely for you. Maybe. If you're going to live in the house a very short time, if you say, I'm going to live here for a year and a half and then I know I'm going to move, then frankly, buying down a loan is a dumb idea. You will not make money doing that. Go ahead.
Can you pay the points at the beginning of the mortgage, or
Yes.
do you have to wait until the end?
No, paying the points is always up front. You will pay the points at closing. That's why let me tell you this, if I'm buying a house for $200,000 and I'm putting $50,000 down, it will probably cost me $57,000, $58,000 to buy the house. $50,000 down payment and $6,000 or $7,000 or $8,000 in closing costs. Points and other fees, and I mean, you wouldn't believe how many, there's pages of expenses associated, thousands of dollars to buy a property or sell. Okay? Anyway, so be aware that points are a fee that they charge, 1% for 1 point of the loan, and you can buy down loans and change the interest rate by paying more points if you choose to do that. Okay? What's a convenience user in the world of credit cards? What's a convenience user?
Something that's convenient.
A convenience user is a person who pays off their credit card at the end of each month. They're not using the credit card for debt because they're paying it off. They are using the credit card for convenience. I mean, I go around and buy things with my credit card. I might buy 20 different things and use my credit card 20 times in a month. And all I have to sit down is once a month I have to sit down and write one check to pay all of it. Very convenient. Okay, that's a convenience user. Does the credit card company like me, even though I don't pay them any interest?
No.
Yes, they do. Why? Why do they still like me?
Because you pay your payments.
Well, but do they make any money off me? They do, actually. Remember, whenever I use my credit card, they charge the merchant a merchant fee. So they're making money off of me, even though I'm not paying any interest.
Well, they still don't like you.
Well, they may
They
not
don't
like
you
me.
as much as people who have to pay interest.
I'm not as valuable to them as somebody who pays the minimum payment, I guess. That's true. But they like me a lot. Trust me, they tell me that in letters. They write me a letter saying, we love you. That happens all the time. Anyway,
Happens all the time.
it does. It's ridiculous. I get so tired of opening those. All right, anyway. Let's see. That's a bad question. All right. What's a home inspector? What does a home inspector do? Yeah.
They like check it out before you buy a house.
They check it out. That's right. They are supposedly trained individuals that can look at your electrical system, your plumbing system, your roof, in your attic, the walls in your basement, the floor. They can find all the hidden defects. Who pays for the inspector?
The person who wants to buy it.
Generally, it's the buyer, but it's negotiable. Sometimes you can, when you make an offer, you can say, seller to provide a home inspection, you know, and you can ask for that if you want, and you can negotiate that. Home inspections generally, give or take, it's about $300, and it can really be very beneficial to you. We see it's very popular now. Home inspections are very popular, very common. If you want to buy a house, you want to make sure it's in good shape when you buy it. You don't want the furnace breaking the week after, or even worse, having a furnace problem where it's leaking gas and all of a sudden your house explodes. That would be a bummer. So, home inspections are good. Okay? Now let's see. What are the disadvantages of renting?
No tax.
No tax benefits at all. That's true. What else?
You don't own it.
You never own it, ever. You can live there for 100 years and you will never own it. That's correct. You have to deal with a landlord. You have to deal with their restrictions. They may restrict you. You may not be able to get a pet. You may not be able to smoke. You may not be able to hang something on the walls. They may not even let you paint. You have people living right around you, on top of you, on the side of you, sometimes. Now, I'm not trying to paint a negative picture of it. There are advantages to renting also. But you are restricted. You do not have free access, and you don't do whatever you want to do on the property when you're a renter, okay? What are the advantages of renting? You don't have to pay any property taxes, you're right. It's less money getting into the property.
Sometimes you have to pay for utilities.
Sometimes. You do not have to pay repairs. And you have flexibility, mobility. You can move much more easily than if you own property. So there are advantages to both, and there are good times when renting makes a lot more sense. One of the things my wife and I want to do, when we retire, we want to live in various places. I want to go live in Paris for 6 months or live in Australia for 6 months. Well, I'm not going to go to Australia and buy a house if I'm going to just live there for 6 months, right? That would be stupid. I would rent in that case, because I'm going to not be there long enough to justify, even if I don't even know if I could maybe I can buy a house, I don't know, in Australia. In some countries they don't let foreigners buy property. In America we do let foreigners buy property. Whether we should or not, I don't know. Anyway, let's see, what's the first step? This is a weird question, you just have to know this. What's the first step of balancing your checkbook?
How much money you have?
Nope. The first step, according to the book, first step of balancing a checkbook is comparing the checks you wrote, making sure you know the numbers, to what the bank statement says. You want to make sure that the bank statement agrees with how much you say the checks were for. Does that make sense? I don't know anybody who does that, but that's what this book says is the first step of the process.
Bank statement and what?
What?
You're comparing the bank statement.
To the check numbers that you wrote, or the amounts you wrote. You want to make sure that the bank and you agree with how much the check was for. Okay? Let's see. Let's say you're selling your house and you've put it up for sale for $199,999. What do we call that number?
Weird.
Call it 200,000 then. That number is called that is called the listing price. The listing price. You are listing your house for sale. Now we call it that because if you use an agent, they take your information in your house and they put it on the MLS, which is the multiple listing service. See, the big advantage of listing your house with an agent is that once the agent knows about your house, he puts it out there for everybody, and there are hundreds of agents that look at your house. One of the biggest problems with selling a house is getting people to know that your house is even for sale. I mean, you can put a sign up in front of your house, but only people driving by will see it. So how do you get the word out that you have a house for sale and you want hundreds or thousands of people to look at it? You list your house, well, you could do that, but you could list your house with an agent, and they put it in the MLS, and then hundreds of agents throughout the county can see that house for sale. And they cooperate with each other, basically. Usually, that's how it works. So your agent lists it, some other agent from Century 21, they sell it, and they split the commissions, and everybody's happy. That's the way it works. Okay? Let's see. What's the biggest monthly expense for most Americans?
Their house.
Either their house payment or their rent. That's usually their single biggest expense. Okay? That's true. What's the FDIC? The FDIC. Who remembers? The FDIC is the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and they are the ones who guarantee your savings accounts and checking accounts deposits in your checking account and savings account.
So who is that again?
The FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. Okay? How much do they guarantee up to?
150,000.
250,000. Exactly. Okay. Let's,
Basically, they insure banks.
they do. They want to make sure. I'll tell you a story this morning I heard on the news. A guy, I tell you this? He walks in and gives a coat and a pair of pants, kind of a suit, an old suit of his. He gives it to the equivalent of DI, which is Salvation Army, which is the same kind of thing in other places. He just, as a donation. He walks away, and then he realizes what he's done. He has left $13,000 in cash in the jacket pocket. Now, I heard about this on the news today. And it's his life savings. He doesn't trust banks. And he's an old guy, an old guy, and he doesn't trust banks, and so he has gotten into the habit of carrying his life savings with him in his pocket. And then for some reason he decided to give it away. Salvation Army is now trying to locate the jacket somewhere in their system. But they're not sure if somebody's even bought it. Maybe somebody has already purchased it, or they don't know what store it went to. So this guy basically has lost his life savings because he was carrying it in his pocket everywhere he went. Now, that is not a big picture financially literate person. Banks are safe. They are guaranteed by the FDIC. If he had put it in a savings account, he would have A, earned a little interest, and B, he would not have lost it by mistake. Sad. Life savings. Ugly. However, thank God there's always a positive silver lining. Somebody bought it.
Bought it for like $2.
$2 or $3, they take it home, they put their hand in their pocket to check out what's in there, and sure enough, they come out with a wad of cash. Yeah,
Or maybe
It's a
a
good
worker
investment.
found it before.
that's possible. You are so deceptive, yeah.
That's a raise.
They should turn it in, shouldn't they?
Yeah, but.
Who would? Oh, I would.
I wouldn't.
Good for you. At least you're honest. Okay. What are the 5 C's of credit? 5 C's of credit.
Oh.
Come on. What? Yeah, it's character. Number 1 is character. That means, will you pay it back? They look at your credit rating to see if you have character. Have you always paid your debts? Character. Number 2 is capacity. Do you make enough income every month to make the payment comfortably? And they have ratios, 28%, 36%, all these different kind of ratios that they use. That's capacity. Number 3, collateral. Do you have something that we can attach to the loan to provide us with additional security? That's what collateral is. It's increased security. Car loans are pretty cheap because they can take your car if you don't pay. Mortgages are the cheapest because mortgages are the safest kinds of loans many times, because they will take your house if you don't pay, and you can't move your house easily. You can drive your car away. So cars are a little more dangerous because if you drive to Texas, it's hard to find you. But you can't drive your house to Texas. Your house is right where it is, and they can take your house. So normally, mortgages are the cheapest kinds of loans, if that makes sense. And the only problem with mortgages is they're long. And so banks don't like to give away money for 30 years. But anyway. So we've got collateral, we've got capacity, and we have character. 4th one is collateral itself. Did I say collateral already?
Yeah.
You just said collateral.
Capital is the fourth one. Capital. How much are you worth? Even if you're out of work, if you have $25 million in the bank, you can probably borrow $20,000. In fact, they may actually use your savings account as collateral, which means you wouldn't be able to touch it sometimes. They can do all sorts of, but if you have $20 million, you can borrow $20,000 pretty much anytime you want. Now, why would you is a different question. If you have 20 grand, why would you go borrow the money? But some people do, and certainly businesses do. Microsoft has $50 billion right now in the bank. They're borrowing money all the time. They're using other people's money. They don't like using their own money. Different. Okay, anyway, what's the fifth one? Conditions. That means that deals with economic conditions out there. Sometimes recession or depression's happening, and it changes the way you can borrow money, and it has nothing to do with you. The first four have something to do with you, but the other one is external conditions. Let's see. Mortgage payments. As I mentioned, most mortgage payments pay both the interest and principal. There's a little bit of the payment that pays down how much you owe. Many mortgage companies also impound. They take money from you for your property taxes and your insurance. That's called escrowing or impounding. If your property taxes are $1,200 a year, they will take $100 from you every month, and they will pay the property tax for you. Very convenient. It's a pretty good deal. I don't object to that at all. What?
The mortgage company?
The mortgage company does that. Now, they're not doing that as a favor to you. They're doing it for them. But it's very convenient. I like it. It's one less thing that I have to worry about. My mortgage pays my property tax. It pays my insurance premium. And I don't have to think about it. Why do they do that?
So that you'll owe them?
It's to protect themselves. If you allow your insurance to lapse and you don't pay the premium, and then your house burns down, the mortgage company is not going to get their money back. Remember this, if your house burns down, the first check that the insurance company writes is not to you. It's to your mortgage company to pay off your mortgage. That's how it works. In fact, they are called an additional insured on the policy. They are insured on the property. So they get paid off before you get to rebuild your house. Pretty clever of them if you think about it. And so they insist that you have insurance. They also insist that you pay your property taxes, because if you don't, if you fail to pay your property taxes, the property will eventually get sold at a tax sale. And when they sell it at a tax sale, the mortgage gets erased. So the mortgage company wants to make sure that your taxes are getting paid every year. So the best way for them to make sure you're paying it is for them to pay it for you. So they collect it from you and pay it, okay? So that's called an impounded or an escrowed account, okay? And we call that PITI. Your pay, sometimes you'll hear, is your mortgage payment a PITI payment or just a PI payment? PI, principal and interest. PITI, principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. Okay? All right. Let's see. Just so you know, there are lots of laws requiring credit bureaus to ensure that your information is accurate and correct. We do not want our credit bureaus to hurt people unnecessarily by unfair practices. If there's a mistake on your credit report, they are required to fix it in a certain period of time. Okay? Just be aware that there are laws about that. What's Consumer Credit Counseling Service about? What is that? Consumer Credit Counseling Service. It's what it says. It's pretty obvious. There are organizations that will help you if you're struggling financially. They will help you create a budget and help pay off your debts. They won't pay them for you, but they will help. They will counsel you. It's like physical therapy. They will help you become better with your money and organize, and sometimes they even contact your credit cards and they arrange for reduced payments, and they do all sorts of things. There are some that pay, that charge you, and there are some that do it for free. There are some that you pay money, you send them $600 a month, and they will pay all your bills for you. And there are others that just create a plan for you, and then you go home and you're on your own to kind of make sure you do it. What's that?
So either they can babysit you or you can babysit.
Exactly, and it depends on what kind of service you need and how much you're willing to pay for it. They're willing to do whatever you need them to do. And they're there to try to stop you or help you before you are to a point where bankruptcy becomes required. If you file a bankruptcy proceeding in bankruptcy court, sometimes the judge will say, before I will approve this for bankruptcy, you have to go to a credit counseling group and see if they can work through your problems and help you solve your problems. They made it, just passed some laws, interestingly, a couple of years ago, making it harder to file bankruptcy. They felt like there were too many people just getting rid of their debt by filing bankruptcy, so now they've made it harder. All right, let's see. Last 10 questions on the test are matching. Well, it's all vocabulary, guys, so you need to know the vocabulary. Let's see, what is a grace period? Grace period. Go.
It's like at the end of the month, it's like you have to pay all your credit cards back by that time, and also start accruing interest.
Yes, grace period is a certain period, number of days before they start charging you interest on things you bought. You want to make sure your credit card has a grace period. Okay? We know what collateral is. We know what's a person called who goes around and tries to get money from people that owes them money? A collector, a debt collector. How would you like that as a job? 8 hours a day, calling people and saying, hey, pay up. You need to pay me. It would be pretty miserable. Yeah.
Nobody would like you.
Nobody would like you, even though all you're trying to do is get the money that's owed to you.
You'd have no friends.
Okay, can we move on? Don't take that job. It'd be too depressing. What's an annual percentage rate? The APR, what is that? Annual percentage rate is how much you actually pay for a loan. You will pay more than, if your credit card is 15% interest, you actually end up paying 15.8% or 16.1% because of other fees and stuff. So they add in all the fees, then they do the calculation, and they get the APR, which is your true cost of borrowing the money. And then if you go to R.C. Willey and buy something on credit, they will have a big box on their contract, and it has, legally, the law tells them how big the box has to be and how thick the line has to be around the box, and it says this is your APR, this is what you're really paying. We might say it's 22%, but it actually works out to be 24.2%. R.C. Willey and all those companies can charge more legally. It's weird, but they have the right. In Utah, Visa and MasterCard can only charge you 19.6%. R.C. Willey has the right to charge you up to 24 or 25%. For some reason that I'm not aware of. But that's true. They have different rates of interest that they can legally charge. What's it called if they charge you more than the legal maximum? What's the word they use? It's called usury. Usury. U-S-U-R-Y. That's charging more than the legal maximum, and that's against the law. There are some companies that are exempted from usury laws, like check cashing places and like pawn shops. When you figure out what they charge 700% or 2,000% sometimes. It's unbelievable if you look at those guys, what they can charge. And I don't know why, I don't understand why they are exempted from the law. I'm not sure what the lawmakers are thinking when they exempt certain people, but that's not part of this conversation. We know bankruptcy. What are the two chapters of bankruptcy? Chapter 13 and Chapter 7. Anybody ever heard of Chapter 11? What's Chapter 11 bankruptcy? Chapter 11 bankruptcy, just so you know, is the business version of Chapter 13. If you're a person, you file Chapter 13. If you're American Airlines, just 2 or 3 days ago, filed bankruptcy. Reorganization, Chapter 11 for business. They're not going out of business, supposedly. They might. Geneva Steel filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy 3 or 4 times before they eventually were flopped over into Chapter 7, and that's where they were liquidated, and they're gone. Okay? That's what happens to them sometimes. What's net income? How do you define net income? Net income equals revenue minus expenses. Revenue minus expenses is net income. And who enjoys a profit? What's a profit? Who gets a profit? Remember that profit only comes from a business. Businesses have revenue, they have expenses. If their revenue is higher than expenses, they have a profit. If you buy Apple stock and you sell it and you make money on the stock, did you make a profit? What did you make?
Capital.
A capital gain. That's right. Now, we don't want to show off and correct people when they say, hey, I made a profit on my stock purchase. Well, they didn't. They made a capital gain. But don't be obnoxious about your greater knowledge, okay? Keep it to yourself. Let's see what else there is here. Hey, what about this? You rent an apartment from me. 6 months later, you decide to move and you rent it to somebody else. What's that called? First of all, most landlords won't allow you to do it, but if they do allow you to do it, what's it called? Anybody remember? It's called subletting. You can sublet your apartment. Sublet. S-U-B-L-E-T. Sublet. And like I say, most landlords don't want you to do it, but they won't let you. But if they do let you do it, many times I'll say, Dallin, you can sublet your apartment if you want to, but you are going to still be held responsible if they don't make the payment. See, that's what happens sometimes. You can't get out of the responsibility even if you.
So it's like you move, or what is sublet?
Sublet is when you have a lease on an apartment and you rent it to somebody else inside of your lease period. Okay. What's renter's insurance? It's exactly what it says it is. It's a small insurance policy on your possessions, your belongings inside of an apartment. Remember, if you're in an apartment and the apartment burns down, your stuff is not covered. If the property is a complete loss, you've lost your stuff, and truthfully, you have nobody to sue. Really, you're not going to win. So when I was in the apartment business, I would hand you a piece of paper when you moved in, and it was big on big letters. It would say, "Please read," and it was about the value of having a renter's policy. Renter's policies are pretty cheap because you're only protecting $5,000 or $6,000 worth of stuff. So the renter's policy might be $75 a year. Pretty cheap to protect yourself. But you're not covered if there's a fire at the apartment building. That's renter's insurance. Let's see, what about amortization? What is that, amortization? Who knows what that word means? Amortization is the process where when you're making a payment every month, you are paying down the principal amount of the loan. You are reducing how much you owe. That's amortization. Remember, if there are two types of loans: fully amortized loans, means loans that pay themselves off by making the payment, or balloon loans. You make payments for 5 years, and then at the end you owe $20,000 balloon payment. Which ones are safer? Fully amortized loans are much safer for you. Also, there are loans that are fixed rate mortgages and loans, and variable rate or adjustable rate loans. Which one's better? Fixed rate. The interest rate never changes, the payment never changes. There are people today still making a payment of $312 on their house because they bought it 29 years ago. Wouldn't that be nice? Own a house and be paying a payment of $300? Yeah. Because they have a fixed rate mortgage and it never changes. So the only loans to get generally in life are fixed rate, fully amortized. That's where you want to be. Okay? Anything else gets kind of dangerous sometimes. Let's see, what is the legal document indicating ownership of real estate? Or no, title is what a car. That's what you transfer the title. No, what did you call it?
A deed.
A deed. That's correct. The deed is the legal document that transfers ownership to the new person. Yeah. So if you say, well, I have the deed to the property, that means that you have ownership. Okay. Good. Let's see. How about home equity loan? We talked about that. We talked about debit cards. We've talked about credit unions. What's the difference between a credit union and a bank?
You have to be a member too.
Credit unions are non-profit. Therefore, they generally can offer a little bit better interest rates on savings accounts, a little bit lower interest rates on car loans because they are not trying to make a profit, theoretically. Okay? Let's see, we talked about endorsements. What's the APY? What is an APR is the annual percentage rate. APY is the annual percentage yield. And what is that? This is when you lend money. When you put money in a savings account and you are earning 4% on your money, but they're compounding it quarterly, right? And so the second quarter, you're going to earn interest on the principal amount and the previous interest. So on a 4% savings account, actually you're going to earn 4.2% or whatever. And that's the APY. That's your actual yield, including the compounding. Isn't this fun? Okay. And I think that's it. That is the end of the review.
Hunger Games.
May I suggest, yeah, great. May I suggest that you look over your notes and you get into the textbook, chapters 5, 6, and 7, and you look especially at the terminology involved, okay? That's where a lot of the test will be. Okay, everybody say goodbye to the camera.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, camera. All right.